Hello everyone, this is George. Today I want to talk about a book I recently read, A Sport and a Pastime by James Salter. It's a novel that was written in 1967. It's relatively short, clocking in at under 200 pages. So I purchased this book when I was actually in Wisconsin this summer for the tour of America's Dairylands. And I don't remember where exactly all of my books come from, but since this one was a recent or a relatively recent pickup this summer, but it's still pretty fresh in my mind. And I just recently got a chance to read it. And this is one of those books where it's pretty, I guess, prolific in terms of its pretty graphic descriptions of sex. So the book itself follows a Yale College dropout named Dean and his escapades with this woman, Anne Marie, while they're in France. And what's maybe the most interesting part of the book is that it's actually told from the perspective of a narrator, someone who knows these people, but is never there. Obviously, this isn't a book of menage a trois. There's a number of reasons why you'd want to read this book. Obviously, if you want gratuitous descriptions of sex, that's very present here. Aesthetically, it's paced very well. But I think the most interesting part of this book really is what happens with that kind of transformative power of storytelling. It goes beyond just the sex itself to describe why these stories are so enticing for us, because it goes into this kind of pathology of sex. It's not necessarily someone reminiscing about their own sex life and their memories of it and all of those things that, you know, maybe all of us kind of experience when it comes to recounting our past, but instead it's this power of the narrator's erotic imagination for these events that he couldn't have been a part of. And I think that really brings up this interesting idea of, you know, our own personal erotic imaginations that happen outside of the realm of storytelling, you know, when it comes to like why we find memories to be so compelling to us, why certain events are imbued with so much more significance and so much more power, whereas other events like drunken hookups and sex that kind of falls into the realm of the mundane isn't necessarily noteworthy. So I'm going to read you a passage that kind of, in a way, clearly describes what the narrator is doing in recounting this story for us. It goes on page 47 to say, "Certain things I remember exactly as they were. They are merely discolored a bit by time, like coins in the pocket of a forgotten suit. Most of the details, though, have long since been transformed or rearranged to bring others of them forward. Some, in fact, are obviously counterfeit. They are no less important. One alters the past to form the future, but there is a real significance to the pattern which finally appears, which resists all further change. In fact, there is the danger that if I continue to try, the whole concert of events will begin to fall apart in my hands like old newspaper. I can't bear to think of that. The myriad past, it enters us and disappears, except that within it, somewhere, like diamonds, exists the fragments that refuse to be consumed. Sifting through, if one dares, and collecting them, one discovers the true design." So I think that passage really clearly expresses what the narrator is doing with this idea of his power of imagination and how it's kind of coalescing with the events that actually had taken place, and kind of bringing about this idea that the narrative itself becomes present and becomes actually brought out into the surface because of that transformative power of his memory, and really, you know, acknowledging the parts of it that may be entirely fabricated, but that in no way takes away from, you know, the story that he's trying to tell. And I think that's a really powerful idea, and I think that really kind of explains why in so many ways we vicariously live through other people and their experiences, because our imagination fills in the blanks of the parts that of course we have no access to. You know, you think about what is it like to be in a certain context. In this, you know, in this book, it's about being involved in this really powerful sexual experience with another person. You know, the storyteller can really only do so much in terms of what they bring to the table in recounting their story as it happened to them. But then, you know, that's what's beautiful about the story itself, is that it becomes transformed within the storyteller and the person receiving the story. and that process is kind of mirrored. So, the narration's taking place in the book, but you yourself as the reader are transforming these erotic experiences, and you imagine, wow, I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to be a part of that? And I found that really interesting. I thought that was something that was, you know, it really drew me in. And once I started, like, ruminating on it and thinking about, like, what are my reactions to this book, it I think gave it a lot more weight. This isn't just another mid-century 20th century novel about American expat just running rampant in Europe. Like, you think maybe Ernest Hemingway. Instead, I mean, it really does seem like it's a meditation on the nature of, the power of our imaginations. And the two characters, they tour the country in this car, and the car itself is borrowed. So it becomes this kind of symbol of the sexual drive, and a double entendre, the drive that not only takes them around, around the countryside, but also that leads them to, like, experience these things with each other. And I found that really interesting, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it even contributes to the way that the story ends. The story is able to pack so much in so little. Another thing that I found really interesting was that the characters themselves, Dean and Anne-Marie, weren't necessarily that interesting to me. And I think in another way, this seems like it was intentional. It does go into their backgrounds, just to kind of maybe fully flesh them out to make them, at least functional characters within the story. So at least you get an inkling of what's motivating them. But it really does feel like in this story, within a story, they're merely objects of sexual desire and sexual fantasy for the narrator. And I think that's really striking. These characters themselves became, like, wholly objectified. Like, to be honest, I didn't really care what was happening in their heads. Like, you all working through the novel, you do get a sense of what's going to happen. And I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but when it does happen, you're not necessarily surprised, and you don't even really feel sorry for anyone involved, because when it came down to it, their entire purpose was that of sexual objectivity, to be, distinguished from you as the subject. You're observing them, not necessarily trying to empathize with them. And I think that's what made this a really powerful story, and one that I'm not really used to. So, typically when we talk about, the merit of, Jesus, that was really loud. 6th Avenue, very loud tonight. Genre fiction, you're typically looking for plot-driven stories, and then with quote-unquote literary fiction, you're looking for deep characterizations, explorations of pathos and a character study. But what was really interesting about this book is that you really get neither. The narrator himself becomes very self-aware in the sense that he's not very reliable. He tells you, I'm embellishing details here. Like, there's no way that this person could describe to, like, very vivid detail how these two characters are having sex. So would I recommend this book? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came to it looking for pretty vivid descriptions of sex. I'm kind of a horn dog, kind of want to read some dirty stuff, some smut. And you get it, and that's really satisfying. But I was very pleasantly surprised to be met with this really powerful story. It's this nature of storytelling and how the narratives and the meta-narratives kind of come together to really, like, make a statement, not only that it applies to the erotic nature of storytelling in our imaginations, but really just the idea of how stories themselves are imbued and fetishized with this kind of narrative power. And it's not really a question that I've, to be honest, have explored too much, but I'm hoping to do more of as time goes on. So, thank you for watching this video. Yeah, I would definitely recommend A Sport and a Pastime. If you want to see more book reviews or have any suggestions, please leave a comment below, subscribe, hit the like button, all that, So until next time.